Well, good evening. Thank you very much for the opportunity to spend a little time with you and to talk a bit about engineering education, although I think what I will say tonight actually applies much more broadly than just to engineering education. And I picked a rather audacious title in some respects to talk about how we might prepare students for game-changing careers. And you've seen, I think, throughout the course of the program today, lots of examples of the kinds of things that students can do, or that people who have educations from industry, from universities can do in the humanitarian area. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time tonight talking to you about some changes that are happening in engineering education and what the implications are for the kinds of projects that all of you are and we are interested in. So I want to start by observing that students today really do seek careers in areas that are going to contribute to changing the world. I don't know if any of you have opportunity to talk with young people in middle school or high school, but in my job I get to do that reasonably often, and when I ask them what they want to do with their lives, they often say, I want to do something that's going to change the world. And they often don't know what that means or what the next step is, but they really want purposeful careers. Another starting point here is that, in my experience, whatever students are majoring in, whatever their undergraduate major is, they seek out projects and competitions and things that will teach them the skills that they're going to need to have these kinds of purposeful careers. And I'll show you some examples of that in just a couple minutes. So I'm going to start by showing 4 or 5 examples of the kinds of projects that students at Stanford have been working on over the last several years. And I won't dwell on these at any length because I think you've been looking at examples like this all day long, and you will be over the next day or two of the conference as well. But I wanted to do this to kind of set the stage for what kinds of things we're helping to educate our students to be able to do. So once I've done that, then I'll talk about how we can structure undergraduate curricula and engineering education so that the students we graduate walk out of there prepared and equipped to be the kinds of people who actually will change the world. So just a few examples. This is an interesting one from several years ago. 20 million premature infants are born every year. Many of them don't survive if they're born in undeveloped parts of the world. Primarily because many of them can't regulate their body temperature and they need to get to a hospital and they can't get there in time in order to save their lives. So this problem was given to a course at Stanford called Design for Extreme Affordability, which is a course that's taught in the Design Institute of the D School that I'll say a few more words about a little later. And the students first did some field work to go and really understand the problem, and what they discovered was that the problem really was the fact that many of these children are born in remote areas and there's no electricity, and therefore whether or not there's an incubator doesn't really matter because there's nothing to plug it into. So in fact, they went through several iterations on designs. Many of them failed, but they finally ended up with what looks like a tiny little sleeping bag. But it's actually quite sophisticated technically because the lining of the sleeping bag has a phase change material in it whose melting temperature, it's a wax actually, and its melting temperature is 98 degrees Fahrenheit. So you can actually take this, put it in the sun or put it over a fire or in boiling water. It'll get up to 98 degrees Fahrenheit and hold that temperature for 4 to 6 hours. And that's enough time for the mother of the infant to actually carry the child to a place where there is a real incubator that could then be used to help save the life of the child. So in typical Stanford fashion, this resulted in a company which was formed actually in India, and they're now manufacturing and selling these things at a cost which is about 0.1% of the cost of a traditional incubator. So it's a solution to a problem that really exists, and it's an interesting technical solution. Second example, taken from the same course, 1 in 5 people in the world really only have kerosene as a lighting source in their households, which of course is not only dangerous, but it's expensive and doesn't really produce very high quality lighting. So the challenge again was to come up with a simple technical solution to help provide lighting for people out in remote areas of the world. And the result is actually technically very simple. It's an LED light source, a battery, and a solar cell to charge it during the day. But this again resulted in a company which was formed and now sells these things around the world at low cost to provide lighting sources for people who don't have access to electricity. More sophisticated technical example. This is a competition that was just last week, the Solar Decathlon down in Irvine, California. And the competition there, which was worldwide, was to build a energy efficient house And these houses, there were 20 or 30 competitors from all around the world, and the houses were judged on the basis of affordability, energy efficiency, technical sophistication, and cost, and so on. And this project's interesting at Stanford because this was entirely student organized, entirely student run. So this all happened before any faculty, before any administration were involved in. The students just said, we want to do this. They raised the money, they built the house, they transported it down to Irvine, they competed against global competition, and they ended up, I think, finishing 4th or 5th in the overall competition. So this house is now actually going to be transported back to Stanford and put up on a reserve called Jasper Ridge, and it's going to actually be the permanent home of the person who actually lives there and runs this nature preserve on the Stanford campus. So again, it's another example of what students can do given the motivation to do it. One final simple technical example. This is a faculty member in civil engineering at Stanford, and the problem here is the fact that in places like Bangladesh, there are large numbers of children who die and get seriously ill because of water contamination, and diarrhea and lots of other problems arise. The solution is actually very simple. Technically, all you have to do is chlorinate the water, but of course chlorination can be a difficult process if you don't really understand how much and everything else. And so the technical solution here was to incorporate something in the pump, which pumps the water, which uses the Venturi effect to actually put a controlled number of drops of chlorine into the water as the water is dispensed through the pump. And here's an example of it actually being used. So it's a very simple technical solution that solves a real problem without requiring the people who are using it to be technically sophisticated. Now, I do want to show you two final examples that are much more technically sophisticated than these ones I've shown you, just because the same point applies, which is that students are excited about solving real problems. And sometimes something very simple helps solve the problem. Sometimes it's something much more complicated. So this is an example of a student-led project, again, whose goal was to make driving safer, essentially to get rid of the human driving the car. And so this was a set of competitions which were held sponsored by DARPA. In 2005 there was a desert race. In 2007 there was actually a race through a simulated city. And in both cases the cars were completely autonomous. And so it was really a race about software and recognition systems and decision-making systems, AI, and so on. And the Stanford car actually won this race and came in second in this race. But the students who competed here were primarily software students from computer science, because these cars are really all about algorithms and decision making under uncertainty. So this is an example where much more sophisticated technology was used, but again solving a really very important problem, which is safety. And the last one I'll show you is from the medical field. So I've never had much serious surgery, but many people have, and I've been told, you know, when doctors who are surgeons go in and they're getting ready to do something, they often don't exactly know what they're going to find, and so they sort of design what they're going to do in real time once they get you opened up and figure out what they're going to do, which is sort of a scary thought. But there are sophisticated engineering techniques now. For example, in cardiac surgery, you can actually produce very high-resolution images using MRI of the heart of a particular patient. And you can then take that image and embed it in computer models, which are based on physics-based models of flow and pressure and velocity and so on, and actually calculate and simulate the behavior of the heart. So this group of students actually worked on simulations, and the color coding here, this is the velocity, for example, over here of the blood, and this is an actual 10-year-old patient who had this condition, which is right here, this is the aorta, which is a normal large vessel coming out of the heart, and you can see it's constricted right here, which is not normal. And as a consequence, the blood flow is very uneven down here. So the doctors could actually use this, diagnose the problem, try out in the computer simulation tool solutions to it. They could actually open this up and put a stent in there. They could actually put bypasses in and see what happened, all in the computer. And then when they got the child open, they knew exactly what they were going to do to find an optimal solution to that child's problems. So again, these are projects mainly run by students, and the last two are technically much more difficult, but the point is that students really, really want to work on these kinds of problems. So let me then talk a little bit about how we prepare students, or how we think about preparing students for these kinds of careers. So there are clearly dozens of other examples, and you've seen many of them or others of them today, and you'll see more tomorrow and the next day. So there's no lack of problems and interesting things to work on. It's also clear to me, and I think to all of you, that students today really do seek careers that want to change the world. So we've got the problems, we've got the interest, and how do we make use of all of that? So how can we provide skills that they need to do this as part of their normal university education? So I'm an engineer, and my day job is to think about what kinds of education we ought to provide for engineering students. Now if you think back, those of you who maybe studied engineering some years ago, engineering used to be about take a bunch of math, physics, and chemistry, and if you get through all that, then maybe we'll show you some examples of some problems you can actually solve in the engineering world. We used to lose a lot of students because they never made it through the math, physics, and chemistry, not because they couldn't, but because they didn't want to. It was just they couldn't see the end game and figure out why they would want to do all that. So we've made, and others have made, really big changes in how we think about engineering education today. So we recruit more students to engineering and we retain more students in engineering. Because if people are going to work on the kinds of examples I showed you, they need to have the technical skills to be able to make a difference and find real technical solutions. So let me talk about undergraduate engineering education to start with. And I'm going to show you quickly some examples of several things. First off, introductory courses are critical. You need to provide right up front some motivation for students to study engineering. They've got to learn the math, they've got to learn the science, but there needs to be a motivation for them doing that or they will drop out and choose some other, perhaps easier, undergraduate engineering major. The curricula in the majors, once we've got them hooked by showing them the power and interest, the interesting problems they can solve in engineering, we need to think about how we teach them the fundamentals and whether or not we can keep them once we have them. And traditionally, lots of engineering students have been lost, once they sort of get mired down in the details of an engineering curriculum, which has been very rigid historically and very difficult historically. Now I'm going to argue, I'm going to show you an example in each of these areas, but I'm going to focus primarily on this area because in our experience, technical skills are necessary, but they're not sufficient. So if you want to have students who are going to be game changers, who are going to solve the real problems that we have in this world, they need a whole set of other skills besides technical skills. They need to be creative, innovative, they need to be entrepreneurial, they obviously need good writing and speaking skills and so on. And historically, engineering curricula hasn't really focused very much on these skills. I mean, we've sort of said, well, we'll teach you the technical stuff, and then when you get out in industry or wherever you're going to go, you'll maybe learn how to interact with other people, and how to work in teams or something. But we don't teach that. It's not a technical topic, and so we don't teach that as part of engineering. Well, we should, because I think your own experience would tell you that these skills are every bit as important as technical skills in being successful in an engineering career. Now the last point I want to make here on this slide is I think it's really critical that we do not force high school seniors to pick a major. You may not realize this, but half of the engineering schools in this country require students to apply directly to a major out of high school. Now I don't know about you, but I know lots of high school seniors who don't really know what it is they want to do. And so if you tell them, if you want to be an engineer, you've got to apply as a senior to the electrical engineering department at University X, they're not going to do it. They're going to apply to something else because they don't even know what electrical engineering is. So many universities now are trying to get to the place where they admit students to the university. This is what Stanford does and a number of other universities. Then the students get there, they can shop, they can look, they can learn, and then they can pick a major after they have more knowledge and really understand what the opportunities are in engineering. So let me talk just quickly about introductory courses. So one of the changes that was made in our curriculum, and this has been typical of other universities as well, is to offer what are called introductory seminars. These are usually taken freshman year. And these are some typical topics. So there's more than 200 of them offered university-wide at Stanford each year. And if you look at the titles, energy options for the 21st century, can machines know, can machines feel? I mean, these are topics which require not much in the way of prerequisites, and they attract students with a really broad spectrum of interests. And the net result of this is we actually capture a lot of students to technical disciplines who otherwise wouldn't have even known what it meant to be a computer scientist until perhaps they took this course and really got fascinated by what it is that machines can know or can't know in terms of comparison to humans. So having these kinds of seminars, which are small class, one faculty member, 10 to 15 students, and 1 quarter long, are terrific ways to show students that there are really interesting things they can do with a technical degree. Another introductory level course that we offer, and this again is similar to other universities, is something we call Sophomore College. And this is a 2-week-long intensive course, one course, 2 weeks long, 24/7, that's given before the beginning of fall quarter. And so the students come to the class and they interact with a single faculty member, in this case John Eaton, who's in mechanical engineering. This is the entire class, and that's the only class they take for 2 weeks. So in this class they actually built a jet engine from scratch. No nothing. They machined it, they designed it, they simulated it, and they fired it up at the end of 2 weeks, and nobody got hurt. So, but you can appreciate how much this means to students who have no clue how a jet engine, obviously they didn't build something this sophisticated, but they built something that acts like that. And you can see it right down here, the one they actually built. But it actually fired up and worked and generated thrust. And so this is an incredible project for students to give them a sense of what it means to be a technical person. And it again is a means of reaching out and recruiting more students. Let me say a word now about technical majors. And so the example I'm going to use is computer science. And the reason I'm going to use this major is because back around 2000, about 14 years ago, the undergraduate majors in this country nationwide peaked. It had been rising all through the 90s, and then the internet or the .com bubble busted. And so the population of undergraduate majors crashed. It in fact went down by 50%, and I'll show you the data in a second. So computer science faculty and departments and so on got really worried. And this was also the same time when everyone was saying, don't major in computer science because all the software jobs are going to India. So why would you want to get a degree in computer science, because you're not going to get a job when you get out. So the consequence of that was that a lot of CS departments tried to rethink and redo their undergraduate curriculum to get more students to consider this as a major. So this is sort of graphically how a CS major typically looks. There's a set of things here in the center which are called fundamentals. And if you look at any engineering major, there's fundamentals. In mechanical engineering, it's thermodynamics and a few others. And these are the things that every student has to know. And then surrounding that are all the really exciting things you can do with these fundamentals if you ever escape this little trap in here and get to work on the interesting problems. So the redoing of the curriculum in computer science basically was to recognize that over time, this area only gets bigger. There's only more foundational stuff that you have to know, and as a consequence, there's less and less, even less of this stuff that you can do. And all that does, when you expand this region here, is cause students to pick other majors. And so the consequence then is, the main thing it accomplishes is to lose more students in other majors. If you say, we're going to teach you all this stuff, and then when you're a senior, you can maybe work on some of these problems. So what did our CS department do? Well, they said, we'd like to create a path that looks like this for any individual student, so that there would be less of this and more of this out here, and they could really take this ellipse and put it anywhere around this circle to work on applications. So in fact, if you look at the whole portfolio of majors, there are tracks that students could pick. They could pick any one of these around there. And so what that in consequence does is expand the whole opportunity for computer science majors. Now the implication of that, of course, is that the center stuff here has to go down. You simply can't teach as much of it. And so this shrinks. So you might say, well, you're not teaching the fundamentals. How are they going to do? Are they going to be successful computer scientists when they graduate and work? And the answer is yes, of course they are. And they learn as much in the time they've been there by looking at some of these applications as they would have by focusing just on the core fundamentals in the center. So what happened as a consequence of that? So here's the data, numbers of CS majors at Stanford. Here's the .com bubble around 2000. You can see this is where it crashed when there weren't going to be any CS jobs available and so on. So the new curriculum I just showed you was introduced right here in 2008. And the consequence of that, when it was introduced, is shown here. And the consequence now is that computer science is the largest undergraduate major at Stanford. It's the first time any engineering major has ever been the biggest undergraduate major at Stanford. It's bigger than economics, it's bigger than pre-med, it's bigger than human biology, it's bigger than anything else on campus. So this illustrates what you can see happen, when you make some changes in the curriculum to make it interesting for students. So we really can recruit lots more students to technical majors. So let me now turn to what would seem to be the more difficult part of this problem. So let's say we can fix the majors that students pick by being a little more innovative in the curriculum and showing them applications up front. So we can do something in terms of giving them a technical education which will prepare them to solve important problems. But as I said earlier, there's a whole set of other things they need to have as well. Creativity, innovation, entrepreneurship, communication skills, working in teams, commitment to lifelong learning. There's a whole set of things here that are not normally part of an engineering education. But we, along with many others, have really worked hard to try and incorporate these things into a standard undergraduate education. And I just have time to show you a few examples of this, but I want to show you some examples of how you can do this and make it really interesting, not just for engineering students, but for all undergraduate students. So we think about this in terms of educating what we call T-shaped people. So the vertical part of the T is sort of the technical major. The horizontal part is the breadth, entrepreneurship, creativity, innovation, and so on. And so the question then is, how do you actually teach this stuff up here? Or can you teach this stuff up here? Or are some people just born creative and other people are not? Are some people born innovative and other people are not? So, creativity, innovation, can you teach it? And if so, how do you teach it? Well, you don't teach these kinds of skills through normal classroom experiences. I can tell you that asking me to come up and give a lecture about how to be a creative person and putting up the 10 bullet points of being a creative person will make nobody creative, because that's not how you learn how to be a creative or innovative person. So the best approach, and we've done lots of experiments, is to give students open-ended problems with multiple solutions they haven't seen before. Put them in uncomfortable situations. Don't give them problems where the answer is got to be to 3 decimal places or it's wrong. They're never going to get to be creative and innovative if they're only solving problems that have to solve to 3 decimal places. Another really interesting thing that we've discovered is that competitions are incredibly effective at teaching students how to be creative and innovative. And I'll show you an example of that in just a second. So in fact, the example I'll show you is something called the Global Innovation Tournament, which was first run in 2007. So what is this competition? Well, the competition is the following. The students are asked to form a team, 4 or 5 students. And from experience, they know they better not bring people like them, because they're not going to be successful if they bring 5 double E's as their team. They better bring a double E, a computer scientist, a business school student, a sociologist, and maybe someone who studies English. And that's their team. They don't know what the competition is when they show up. They show up usually on a Friday evening, and the competition's over the weekend. And all they know is that when they show up on Friday evening, each of the teams is going to be given a physical object. They don't know what it is, and the goal of the competition is for each team to produce the largest amount of economic value they can from the physical object they're given over the next 3 days. That's the competition. So the first time this was run, in 2007, the physical object that the teams were given was a pad of Post-its. And you might say, what are you going to do with a pad of Post-its? Well, you'll be amazed what you can do with a pad of Post-its. If you're creative and innovative and so on, the students set up auctioning contests, they did all kinds of things, and the net product of each of the teams is a short 3-minute video of what their team did with the pad of Post-its. There's another version of it. If you're interested, there's all kinds of videos on YouTube. Here's the one year's competition where the object was a recycled water bottle, and they're asked to do something, whatever they can, out of recycled water bottles. And so this team actually ended up making an algae bioreactor from recycled water bottles and created a 3-minute video of how they did this and how it worked and everything else. And they did this over a weekend. So the point of this is it's not so important what the teams did. What's important is that they realized through the competition that they really could be creative and innovative and come up with unexpected solutions to a problem they were given. And so each of them discovered through this that they really actually could be creative, innovative, entrepreneurial young people. So this is part of the educational process now for most Stanford undergraduates. And none of this is required for a major. It's all sort of optional courses that students can take, and they all take it because they love it and they see the value in doing these kinds of competitions and these kinds of courses. So the place in which some of these things are taught is something we call the Design Institute, and it was founded about 8 or 9 years ago by David Kelly, who was the founder of IDEO here in Palo Alto, which is a design firm known worldwide. And what David said was, when we're teaching students how to think about creating something, whether it's a product or whether it's solving a problem, they can't really just think about technology. And they need to include business issues, whether this is economically viable or not. But most importantly, they need to include human values. Are they solving a real problem that people really want to have solved? And so the premise that happens in the D School is that the need finding or the searching for what the problem really is happens first before any of the technical solutions are talked about and thought about. So this is what a typical class looks like in the D School. And again, these are all optional classes, not required for majors, but you can see there's lots of post-its being put up on boards, debate and screaming and shouting and so on, teams trying to figure out how they're going to solve a problem. You can notice that the premise is real projects, interdisciplinary teams. They do the need finding first, and this is a really actually important part of it because part of the success in these kinds of problems is not being afraid to fail. So if you walk into a problem and say, I've got to find a solution, but if I get it wrong, I'm going to get a D or something, that's not the way to unleash your creativity. What you're going to do in that case is do something very conservative and very incremental. So the premise here is fail early, fail often, and get the students really engaged in discovering how creative and confident they can actually be. And these are some of the projects. The two I showed you earlier are from class projects in the D School. So that's the premise that led to those designs. The second example I want to show you very briefly is another program which broadly teaches entrepreneurship. And this is done through the same way, courses, seminars, student competitions, internships, and so on. But entrepreneurship is much, much more than starting companies. Entrepreneurship, the definition I like is this one, which was a young woman who was a student in one of these classes said, entrepreneurship is really a mindset. It's an outlook that shapes the way you see the world and the possibilities that it holds. And it's born of a basic dissatisfaction with the status quo and the courage to say to yourself, this could be better. And that's what entrepreneurship is all about. And our goal is to make sure that every one of our students graduating is entrepreneurial. And that doesn't mean they start companies. It means they approach problems with this kind of a philosophy and this kind of a mindset. So how do we do that? Well, here are some courses that are offered in an engineering school. Probably if you looked at an engineering curriculum a decade or two ago, you wouldn't have seen courses on negotiation and creativity, innovation, and so on, technology venture formation, strategy and technology-based companies, and so on. So there's a whole set of things here which are opportunities for students, and they take them by the hordes. All these classes are way oversubscribed, and none of them are counting towards their major. They aren't courses that are required for an undergraduate degree in anything. They're just opportunities for students to broaden their education while they're students. The final example that we use to encourage students to be really interested in technical careers is to get them exposed early on to research. And so there's a program called Undergraduate Research Experience which takes undergrads and has them spend a summer working in a faculty research lab. And this is an incredibly popular program, as you might imagine. Something like 200 of our undergrads each summer, instead of going out and working, they get paid and they get room and board and they work in a faculty research lab to kind of see what engineering is like as a practice working in a faculty research lab. It's interesting because the very first time we tried this about 10 years ago, I went to some of our faculty and I said, how would you like to have an undergraduate work in your research lab for the summer? And oh, by the way, it won't cost you anything. And the answer was, why in the heck would I do that? I teach undergraduates during the year. The summer I get to work with my PhD students and do something really interesting in terms of research, and I don't need to have all these undergraduates mucking up my lab, during the summer. So we said, just try it, just try it, just try it. So what they discovered after a few of them trying this was that actually undergraduates are really smart, and they actually became really productive parts of the research team really quickly. And now this program, we have 200 each summer, and every faculty member almost has one or two of them in their laboratory in the summer, and they just love it because the undergraduates are actually active members of the research group. So here's the net result of all those things. This is the number of engineering students at Stanford. And as I said earlier, Stanford admits students to the university, and so they vote by their feet in terms of what major they pick. And if you go back over 20 or 30 years, we've typically captured something like 20% to engineering majors. The rest are in economics and pre-med and so on. But when we started making these changes that I've showed you to make engineering more interesting and to also show young people that engineering was a pathway to solving really important problems in the world, you can see what started happening. In the last 5 years, we've nearly doubled the number of students picking engineering majors at Stanford. So these things really work. I mean, you really can get young people interested in technical careers, and you really can get them prepared not just to be technical problem solvers, but also people who have the leadership skills and the entrepreneurial skills and the game-changing skills to go out and do something that really does make a difference in the world. So I'll just conclude then with this last slide. It's a quote that I like a lot, and it's from Chuck Vest, who was the president of MIT for many years and later the head of the National Academy of Engineering. And he said about a decade ago, he said, students are driven by passion, curiosity, engagement, and dreams. And in the long run, making universities and engineering schools exciting, creative, yes, rigorous, and demanding, but mostly empowering milieus is much more important than specifying curricular details. So what he expressed, I think, is really what we've tried to implement. We need to do much more than just cram young heads full of 4 years worth of technical information if we want young people to become problem solvers who are going to take on the really big problems that we face in the world. So I'm a sort of a visual person, and the way I think about this is that we want to take a typical engineering classroom of the 1950s and turn it into something that looks a little bit more like this. So anyway, so thank you.